I said, why me? I'm doing good, I think. And the real answer is, why not me? Why am I something special?
Thank you for joining us here at Gather. We are excited to welcome Roger DeCook, who is joining us this evening, and excited to learn a little bit about his life experiences and his journey, the journey of his testimony specifically. And so, Roger, welcome.
Thank you.
We're very happy to have you.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Good. So, Roger, I've known you for about 5 years. And I've come to admire the person that you are. And so as we decided to start this little adventure of this podcast, you were one of the first people that really was impressed upon my mind that would have a lot of things that were meaningful to share. And so I was hoping that we could start by having you just share with us kind of maybe the early years in your life, and we'll kind of work through from there and orient that around your testimony and what your experiences were like early in your life with our Savior Jesus Christ.
Okay. I was born in a very poor area of Chicago, and there were a lot of gang activities and those kinds of things even at that time, but there was a morality to it. No one beat up your grandmother or hurt your mother or anything like that, but it was a pretty rough area. My father was a Roman Catholic, and my mother was an Irish Protestant, and so I went to both churches every Sunday. Jesus Christ was always important in our household. In my early upbringing, I would go to Catholic school for several years, and then I'd go to public school. Took everything that happened to him and turned it 180 degrees for me. And I literally owe him so much. He was also, raised on the street, so he was able to impart to me things that I needed to learn. Always saying that you never want to be involved with fights, but when you were accosted and you had to fight, that you had to injure the other person badly. And then he wouldn't want to do it again. So at age 8 through 10, my dad knew everybody in the neighborhood, and there was an old middleweight champion of the world who was quite punch drunk, who had a gym. Mm-hmm. So he taught me how to box. And I was supposed to be left-handed, but the nuns wouldn't allow that because that was a bad thing. Oh, interesting. And so I wrote right-handed, but in the boxing ring, because I was naturally left-handed, I had an incredible left hook. Yep. And I was able to probably decrease the amount of fighting that went on with me, probably about 80%, because I could handle myself. I always hated the violence, but that was just something you needed to do to avoid problems. Now, my mother stayed at home, and she was incredibly smart. Now, her first 8 grades were in a one-room school in Pennsylvania, in a small farming community.
So grew up very different.
And grew up differently. Her mother and father had separated, and so her mother and my mother was number 13 out of 14 children. Wow. And her younger brother and her and my grandmother went to work for one of her brothers, whose wife had died and had 4 children. Now, he had converted to Catholicism, so the house was a Roman Catholic house. Mm-hmm. But my grandmother and her children went to a Protestant church. I'm not sure what brand it was, but it was a Protestant church. And Jesus Christ was always very important to her. And they both would pray, but they'd pray separately.
I see.
And
this is your parents when they were
and this is my parents, and that really made a big difference in my life, because I realized that I never wanted to have more than one religion in a marriage, because there were always comments made, derogatory comments, and when I'd be
kind of insulting each other's religion,
yeah,
Okay.
Calling my father a bead clicker, and my father saying you'll never get to the right place. And now they loved each other very much, and they went through really hard times. Doing the right thing was always stress to me, and the Lord was always important to me. I have to admit, I really didn't understand much about the Holy Ghost and about Jesus Christ. I knew he was the Son of God. I knew he was my Savior. But all the interrelationships, I really didn't understand. But religious things are important to me. Another thing that happened very early, I decided I wanted to be a physician. Now, I'm not naturally very intelligent. I'm just a regular guy. But that made me, and my parents had high standards for education. And if you went to school, you had best do the very best you could. So I had that telling me that I always had to succeed. But I also had that inner drive that if you want to be a physician, you've got to be good, and you've got to be smart. And so I was kind of driven that way. And it was so interesting how that affected my whole life. I realized that the good Lord, puts people in your path and gives you opportunities or insights, because I think the Lord was preparing me to be a member of his church. And looking back, that protected me so much. And I still, was learning more about Jesus Christ. It's funny how we have to learn these things the hard way, but I was really learning about the Savior more. Still didn't understand everything. And there was always something just a little bit missing. And so fast forward, I get accepted to medical school. Then I go into the service and I serve my time, and I'm able to by that time I'm a member of the church, and I kept the church standards. I was able to do what I had to do because of my background, and I was okay with the Lord on the way out. And
but when you were in the service, did you serve in a medical capacity?
I served in medical capacity in special ops. Again, the draft had ended and they didn't have docs. Okay. And they had killed off all their docs out of Fort Bragg. A lot of them had been killed off. And so I went directly from residency to Fort Bragg. I never went to Fort Sam Houston for the 3 months to learn how to be an officer.
You went straight into service.
Straight into the service, and I didn't know one rank from another. But because I was an athlete, they put me in something, and this was stupidity on my part. They needed people for special ops to do special things. And so they had this hand-to-hand 3-week course. And I could have quit at any time. You could say I had it, and you could leave.
Were they trying to weed people out?
Well, they weren't trying to lead the docs out, but they wanted just the elite people. But it turned out that we started out and everybody else was not an officer except for one West Point lieutenant and me. And I'm a major, but I'm not really a major because I know anything about being an officer. And so we're the only two officers. And of course, this sergeant major who ran this course, of course, knew who the officers were. So the first guy he picks was the West Pointer. And he says, take this knife away from me. And he tried to take it away. And he hit the West Pointer in the head and gave him 11 stitches in his forehead. And so I'm sitting there. And of course, I'm the next guy he chooses. And I kicked the knife out of his hand because that's what I was raised with. Mm-hmm. And so I was the demonstratee for the next 3 weeks. I had bruises all over my body.
He was getting back at you for getting him, huh?
Oh, yeah. That was the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. But I thought, gee, he's going to beat you up anyway. And I could have quit, and I wouldn't quit.
Dad wouldn't let you. Back of your head, DeCooks don't quit.
So whose unit did I get chosen for? The sergeant's, because he wanted me.
So you mentioned that when you went to the service that you were at that point a member of the church. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about that story and when did that happen and how did it happen?
I'm a first-year resident in OBGYN at Rush Presbyterian. I was also the resident in charge of medical student education. And so all the medical students I'd give the lectures to. And after Roe versus Wade, and after about the 4th week of watching this, I really wasn't teaching that much because I was that far away from just quitting. And I had a medical student who was older, a returned missionary by accident again, from Utah, who was one of the class members of this particular group that came through. And I related to him. And he would have all kinds of questions, so I spent some time with him. Now, the medical students got to, after the first 12 hours, they got to go home. Mm-hmm. And then the next morning, they would start again until the next evening, and then they got to go home. And so when he comes back the next day, he's got this book, and it wasn't the Book of Mormon. It was called A Marvelous Work and a Wonder, which is kind of a missionary handbook. Yeah. And he said, well, this is what my church believes, and I think you feel the same way I do a little bit, but just look at this. See what you think of this. So, okay, so I look at this book, and I'm, up anyway, and I was a really average reader, and if he'd have given me the Book of Mormon, I wouldn't have read that. Yeah. But he gave me this. And I'm reading all this. Click, click, click. This is all true. This makes sense. Why didn't I know this? Mm-hmm. And so by the time I came back home that Monday night, my wife is there, and I said, you really ought to read this. This church is true. She said, this is Mormon. And she had had an experience with a Mormon missionary, and she read all the anti-Mormon literature, and she says, those are the people with multiple wives in Utah. Are you crazy? I said, no, you really got to read this because this is true. I'm telling you. And I said, well, why don't I have you talk to the medical student? And we had him over. We were having family home evening Monday nights. And I would have him over, and he would go over all their questions and all that. And after about 6 months of that, we had gone to church a couple of times, and the missionaries were starting to teach us. Mm-hmm. Long story short, she agreed to join the church. And I would like to say I would have joined anyway, but I didn't want two religions. And I don't know if I would have had the courage to do it
If she hadn't done it.
if she hadn't done it, but she did it. So we did it, and we were baptized. Her folks were just appalled. My folks were not happy, but they were there at the baptism because that's who my folks were. The church was just real important. And it turned out the unit I was in, out of the 15, 6 of us were members of the church. 3 were inactive. And I can tell you that you can have, that Ritz crackers cannot be destroyed, and no matter where we were, we could have sacrament with Ritz crackers. You can't destroy it. I don't think you can digest it either. But by the end, everybody was active.
I mean, after an experience like that.
And I remember, and I've always had a sense of humor, they said, what are the odds of 6 of us being in this unit of 15? And I said, they're trying to kill us. And they all started laughing. But, you know, these were all sergeants, and, you know, they had really been real soldiers, okay? They weren't like me, you know. They put me through things. I had training for 6 weeks and what they had 3 months, you know, and you know, they just needed a warm body who could take care of packages to keep people alive that were captured. But anyway, that was just a happenstance again, but it was just really, you know, a very interesting thing. And but everybody was active by the time I got out.
I got to imagine that you've had some pretty difficult experiences being out there, and maybe you can share, maybe it's something you don't want to share, but was there anything that happened there that either ultimately ended up strengthening your testimony, even though at the time it caused you pain, or things that you saw happen that strengthened your testimony immediately? Or
well, I had a very strong testimony of Jesus Christ, and I watched the terrible things that communism could do. A village chieftain who wouldn't give his young men up to join the VC would have his daughters raped in front of him and then disemboweled. Vaccinating a village by myself, and then having North Vietnamese come in and kill every kid I vaccinated. I mean, you have no idea what evil is until you see communism up front and personal. And thank goodness I had the church, and we never did anything that we didn't have to do. And I took care of every wounded person the same.
no matter
who they were, what, you know, who it was. I took care of my guys first, but I took care of everybody. And I never did anything that would, I was always worried, would I be able to get it done and be brave, because I had never been in combat. But the bottom line is, I was able to do what I had to do, and the Lord had prepared me for everything that happened. I have this testimony of how I have been treated so with kid gloves, because I've always been prepared for all the things that were going to happen. And so I never embarrassed my father, earthly father, and I never embarrassed my heavenly Father. I always did what was right. I had to do things that I had to do. But I love those people that we worked with. And I love those guys that I was with. It's a different bond. But it would have been nice if I didn't have that experience.
Yeah.
But again, I had been prepared for that all my life. I had been prepared. The good Lord has prepared me for, a lot of things that happened. But when I came back, and Dallin Oaks was in the stake presidency in the ward when I came back to Illinois. And I was getting my temple recommend interview. And Dallin Oaks asked me, did you ever have to do this? Did you ever have to do that? Are you having any problem with it? And he didn't have to do that, but he did. And I didn't have any problem with it because, believe me, I had to do what I did. And, but he was so gentle and nice. He took an hour for that temple recommend interview because he knew I just got back from the military. And, I love that man. But he really wanted to see, and he said, well, looks like you've put it away. You're squared away. I said, I think I am. And, and I am. But, I was very happy that my son didn't have to go in the military. Mm-hmm. I would like my grandchildren not to have to do that. If they do that, I think they'll do fine. But you're never the same. I'm not the same person. But I have become much better at understanding Jesus Christ and becoming more like him. I think that is just so incredible. Again, if I didn't have the church, I'm not sure. I would have survived, but I would have been a different person because you get hardened and you have to watch that very carefully. Also, the good Lord chose to give me an autoimmune disease. So all of a sudden, 4 hours of sleep wasn't enough, and I had pain. I could play football, and after icing down the next day, I could play another game. I had this recovery that was unbelievable. But he took that away and gave me an autoimmune disease. So I learned what pain was, and I learned what fatigue was.
Because you really hadn't experienced that.
Because I had not experienced that. I mean, they said hitting me was hitting a fire plug. I got this empathy, and it was so needed. Because as I treated my patients who had fatigue or had pain or had things, I had much more empathy. I also lost in residency, I lost our firstborn child. It had a birth defect and was born prematurely. And that was a little hard to go through, but it was not, my father had done the same thing and went to the military right afterwards. I did the same thing. It was the same pattern. He went going to die. I went wanting to live. I knew that I'd raise that child again. I had the gospel. And it was so important. Believe me, I was afraid, but I always was able to do what I had to do. I always didn't let anybody down, and that was just very important. But I still remember that interview, how caring that President Oakes was. Until I was a member of the church, I really didn't get the knowledge of who Jesus Christ is, the knowledge of who he is, what he did, why he did it, the plan of salvation. The whole thing is, and he's just there, to be able to do everything that he did. The love that he had for us, the love that he had for his Father, the love that he had for the people, even the people who were abusing him. It's one thing if you're in a prisoner of war camp and you're getting beaten all the time and nothing you can do about it. It's quite another when you can do something about it, but you don't. I mean, he had that restraint. He has this meekness, which is this incredible self-control, the doing the right thing for the right reason at the right time. Always doing the will of the Father, never putting himself into it, being selfless. Having the courage to do the things that we can't even understand, and being able to hold out and he could have died any time he wanted, but he held out until he'd taken upon him not only the sins of the world and the punishment for that, but all the pains of diseases, the emotional traumas, the depressions, the anxieties, the hurts of everybody who ever lived on the earth. And only after he had done that, saying, Father, it is finished. That is just someone who is just, I can't even understand it. But that's who he is. And, his caring for everybody, absolutely everybody. I don't care what you've done or anything else. And in one of the talks by Olson, it was, the answer is Jesus Christ. And he talked about his missionary, who was a very good missionary and hardworking. And as most people who are really good people are, was thinking she wasn't adequate, she wasn't good enough. And her mission president asking for the Spirit to tell him what to tell her. And, he tells her, what would you tell someone that told you this? And she said, that Heavenly Father knows all about you. He loves you. He cares. You are enough. And when I bishop doing temple recommends, having people who are so much better than I'll ever be, who gave so much service, and you'd say, do you think that you should have this temple recommend? That was the last question. And they'd invariably say, well, no. And then I'd say, but did you answer those questions truthfully? And they'd say, yes. And I said, well, the Lord thinks you need it. And, that kind of a person is just so important. Because we just don't measure up. We can't ever measure up, and thank goodness, because we have the Savior and the atonement. That is just so very important, that we have that. And But I've had all kinds of things in life. And again, the Lord ended me being able to practice in OBGYN, and I took that field because I loved the internal medicine, I loved the delivering, and I loved surgery. And that gave me a specialty. I could do everything because I loved all of medicine, taking care of people. And I had 2 extra years of internal medicine, which I've used, throughout. And the Lord always, did that, but He gave me experiences so that I could be just a little bit like Him and have compassion and really care and really listen. I tried to impart that to my son. I tried to impart that to my grandson now. And my dad imparted it to me, my dad without education, who said to me, "You're a physician, and that's an incredible privilege, and don't you ever do anything to sully that." It's the preparation that the good Lord always gives you to be able to do the things that you're able to do. I had several things happen during the practice of medicine and the Lord gives me opportunities, and it takes me sometimes a second or third try before I understand the right way. But I know He allows me to do that. I remember when I first got the autoimmune disease, that was pretty hard. I said, why me? Here I'm doing all this. I'm doing good, I think. And don't you want me to do this? And the real answer is, why not me? Why am I something special? Yeah. Then, losing that firstborn, but having the gospel, so I understood that I'd be able to raise that child again. The empathy that gave me for my patients with pregnancy losses, with birth defects, with everything. You've got to be shot at to know what it is to be shot at. It's very interesting, the same boat syndrome. You have to be in that boat. You have to know. And, He gave me another opportunity because I ended up with a stage 4 lymphoma and acute sarcoidosis. My disease is acute relapsing, which means I get these terrible symptoms. Then I'm treated with steroids for a period of time, and they get a little bit better and better. And then I go through the sequence again. Well, I went through the sequence with the sarcoid, but I also had a stage 4 cancer at the same time. And so I, faced that. And now I no longer have to say, why me, Lord? Because I know, why not me? Am I something special? And, be a physician. I've had all these colleagues that I work with and referred to and did things with. I was able to be chief of the staff of the hospital, to be chairman of the department, to work with all these wonderful people, so I could choose my oncologist and have these people who were really good people. And I can't tell you how many wonderful people that I was able to work with, nurses and physicians. But I remember with the stage 4, and I had this autoimmune thing going on too, so I was really, really sick. And they elected to do a certain way of treating it, which was kind of unconventional. They put me on very high-dose steroids. A high dose is usually like 35 milligrams. I was on 150. And so, and it worked. Took 6 months, and I couldn't put my own socks on. couldn't use my hands. And then 3 months into all this, my cardiogram looks a little different. Just a smidge different. Just the axis changes a little bit. And they think I have that tumor in the back of my heart. And if the tumor's in the back of my heart, then they just forget everything because you're dead. And so they go to do a cardiac cath. And I've always exercised. I've always, done all the things. And so I'm scheduled first thing in the morning, and the computer put 2 people in at the same time. And so I go in, and my father-in-law wants to go in with me. So I said, okay. So my father-in-law comes in with me. And they had 2 people scheduled, and the other guy was all upset. And, and so I said to the cardiologist, listen, can you do me at the end of the day? Can you do me at the end of the day? Because it's okay. Yeah. And he said, will you do that? And I said, yeah, that patient's all upset and he needs to be done. So do him. And my father-in-law exploded and said, you were chief of staff and and all this kind of stuff. And I said, forget it. And we went home. And so I'm praying as I usually pray at midday. And I get this voice as clear as can be that says, you're going to have open heart surgery, but you're not going to have any pain. Okay, so I interpret that they're going to be doing the cardiac cath, and they're going to rupture one of the coronary arteries, and they're going to have to take me and crash me and open my chest, and I'm not going to make it. Because everybody has pain with open heart surgery. They sew your chest open, I wake up in the cath lab, and the cardiologist, who's a very, very good friend, good man, and he said, Roger, you have 10% of one vessel left for your whole heart. The good news is you don't have a tumor, but the bad news is you've got to have surgery. And I'll let you have 2 other opinions that you can go to. I looked at him and I said, why would I need to get a second opinion? Because, and I'm still thinking, well, but this is the way it is. And I'm thinking, well, gee, how fortunate it was I had these diseases hit me, because they would have never done this cardiac cath unless they have a stage 4 cancer. Yep. And so they said, well, why don't you stay in? Of course, the cardiovascular surgeon comes right in and talks to me and says, well, we'll do you at 5 in the morning. Do you first. And I said, well, you can do me. He said, no, we'll do you first. I said, okay, that's fine. You just stay here. So I stayed in the cath lab that night. And so I'm there in the cath lab. And one of the people in my ward comes in. This is now 8 o'clock at night, and he sneaks in an Oberweis hot fudge sundae. And he gets it past the nurses somehow. And he said, will you eat it? And I'm thinking, boy, you're just right. So I ate it, and I knew that when they did the surgery, I was going to have these fat droplets, but I didn't care, so I ate this thing.
And you're still thinking, like, I'm on the way out?
Yeah, I
might as well.
This is the best thing in the world. But he sneaks this in, And so I ate that, and I know they're going to come for me at 5, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, the nurse comes in and said, there's a Dr. DeCook on the phone for you. He says, the important Dr. DeCook. Oh, that's my son. And he's down at Wake Forest. Mm-hmm. He says, Dad, I've got it all set up. The plane will take you down here to Wake Forest, and we'll do the surgery here. I said, Charlie, I'm going to do the surgery here. These people are good. my hospital had the best statistics of the whole state. I helped set up that cardiovascular program. And he said, but I got everything set up. I said, thank you, son, but I'm fine. It's okay. And he told his wife, my dad's going to die today. Because, I have all these things going on, and there's no reason I should do well. Right. Anyway, so I have the surgery. My wife does not do well with it when they're taking me off the pump. After they're ready to close you, they have to start your heart again. Mm-hmm. And they have to take you off the pump. And that's, a dangerous part of the surgery. So they tell my mother and my daughter and my wife this, and she goes absolutely ballistic. And my colleagues, and she's yelling and screaming like I'm dead. And in fact, two of my colleagues saw me the next morning and said, I thought you were dead for sure because of her response, but that was just how she did things. And, but everything went smoothly. I also did some Tai Chi right before they came to get me to relax myself. Mm-hmm. And I find out later that there was a study that if you do Tai Chi, you bleed less. Because they were able to pull the tube after 12 hours. Normally you bleed for a day and a half. I got my tube pulled in 12 hours. I was only on the respirator for 3 hours. The average is 7. And some people it's 12. And everything went smoothly. I had no pain. I had absolutely no pain. And then I'm able to walk in the hallway. So the surgeon who operated me is coming off the elevator, and I'm walking the hallway with my IV pole. I had no pain. I mean, it was, and I was debilitated. I mean, I had cancer therapy, I had sarcoid, I had all this stuff, and it was like I had nothing. I went home the second postoperative day from open heart surgery.
I mean, how long are you typically in the hospital after something like that?
6 days. Yeah. I didn't get infections. I was on high-dose steroids. Didn't get anything. Now, they put one vessel in that didn't take because they took a chance on doing it. So I lost the back part of my heart. But that's the part that doesn't contract. So my ejection function is, is fine. My cardiogram looks terrible because the back part of the heart isn't there. Mm-hmm. But, my ejection fraction is 40 to 42, so that's fine. And I did fine. Now, on paper, everybody's writing in the chart how it's the other person's fault that I'm going to die. Yeah. Because, being on the pump should make the cancer worse, and it should make the autoimmune disease worse. My kidneys should fail. A whole bunch of things should happen.
You had everything stacked against you in this.
Yeah, everything. And so I had a mortality of, at least 20%, or at least that, probably higher. And I got absolutely nothing. Had no pain, which is, the only thing hurt a little bit when they pulled the chest tube out. And that was because they said how much it was going to hurt. My cancer should have killed me after 2 years. I will hit 20 years shortly.
But the cancer is gone, or it's just...
Well, this cancer has never been cured. But, average lifespan's 2 years, so...
So are you still taking medication for it? Or?
No. When it comes back, if it comes back blast stage, I'm not going to take anything for it because that's 3% chance of doing something. And, staying alive is not that important to me because I know, we're fine. Dying never bothered me. That's the one thing. But if it comes back in with the regular stage, I'll take the chemo again. That'll be okay, because Jolene will shoot me if I don't. And my heart has been stable, and so I get all these things, But there's always reason for everything. I can always use it for somebody else.
So you did spend some time in some leadership and other callings.
Yes.
Anything that you want to share around experiences there, testimony experiences?
As a bishop, I've had the privilege of people coming into the church. There was an individual who had married a member of the church. His wife had died of a terrible cancer, and he was a good Catholic boy. And I really mean that, a good Catholic boy. And he had gone to, at the time, all the temples in the United States with his wife, had visited all the temples, always went to sacrament with her, then would go to his Mass, and they had tried to convert this man for 14 years. And so I'm a new bishop in a new ward. I'd never been in this ward before. I think I knew 3 people. And I'm told, the story of this individual, and that, he's gone through 17,000 missionaries, and it's just not going to happen. And so, okay. And I meet him, and he does a lot of service. I mean, this guy, if you look up the word service, you see his picture. I mean, and just a good Catholic boy. I have a soft spot. I was a good Catholic boy. We're not so bad. Yeah. And I go to a stake meeting, and there was a general authority from Great Britain whose last name was Johnson. And in Illinois, I mean, we have, every family we would have to visit, everybody'd have 25 to see every month. And if you go over 5, nobody sees anybody. That's the way it works. Mm-hmm. And so we had desperate need of home teachers. And what this general authority, he had dated this girl, and he's a biker in Great Britain with the chains and, with the beard and all this. And he meets this stake president's daughter. And she says, for the second date, you have to meet my dad. So he said, long story short, he's now a general authority. So he looked past all this stuff. Yeah. Anyway, so he says, this stake has a lot of people to visit, and I'd like to tell you that we feel that if you have people who are good Christian people, even if they don't hold the priesthood, use them for service. As soon as I'm told this, in my mind, I'm thinking of this individual. It's a good Christian, and he can help us. So I had the executive secretary next morning have him come in and see me. So I'm seeing him in the office, and I said, Randy, I'm going to ask you to do something for me, and I'd like you to do it, but you don't have to do anything, but I'd really like you to do this because you can do this. And I said, I'd like you to visit these 3 families for me. And he said, Bishop, I'm not a member of your church. I said, I know, but I think you need to visit these 3 families. They really need you to visit them. So he says, I have to think about this. I said, okay, and that's fine. And so he leaves. And at this particular ward, the council line would go on until 7 o'clock at night. I mean, it was booked the entire, because there were all kinds of problems and things. And I get home. I think my wife was in the Stake Relief Society. She was at a meeting somewhere. And my mother and father-in-law living with us because they're building a house. And so I just took my tie off. I started meetings at 5 in the morning, and I'm just ready to crash, and I'm on call the next day. And I got my tie off, and I get a call from this individual, and he says, I really need to see you now, Bishop. And I said, Randy, can I meet you at the church? And 15 minutes? And he said, yes. I'm putting my tie back on. My mother-in-law said, you are the craziest person on the face of the earth. I forbade you from going. I said, I have to go. So I go. And he says, I open the door, we come in, he sits down. He says, Bishop, I want to be baptized. And I said, Randy, that's great. What? And he said, well, after you said you wanted me as a home teacher, even though I'm not a member of the church, he said, I went to my priest and I told him how you would ask me to do service and that I really think I need to do this. And the priest takes out a Book of Mormon from his desk.
What?
And he says, if I was going to change churches, that's the church I'd join.
Oh, my goodness.
So that was his word, and he was baptized. I called the stake president who had told me,
Yeah.
And that man did more service in our ward. He drove President Hinckley. And he tells President Hinckley this story, and President Hinckley mentioned it about this bishop who had this inspiration.
Yeah.
But, it's just the Lord gives you these things. And what I learned is that when you're a bishop, you have this insight and you have this ability to remember names and you have this ability to know who needs to be seen. And you don't even know why. And always there's some reason. And when you're released, you can't remember anybody's name. You forget everything that ever happened within 2 weeks. And it's like the light is turned on, the light is turned off. And it's the most incredible thing I've ever experienced in my life, and I've done it twice now. And it's, if you don't have a testimony that the Lord runs this church, I'd say you got to look a little harder. And if we don't think that the Lord interacts with our lives, you got to look a little bit harder. Because there are so many things that are just not coincidence. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And he knows what each of us needs. And he gives you that experience. And he really wants us back. And he knows you've blown it 3 other times, but he'll do it again. And he'll trust you once again.
He won't quit.
And he won't quit. And it's just the most incredible experience to be able to do that and to really understand his love and his caring, his mercy, his wanting everyone back, his meekness, all these things. And all he asks is that we try. And that he'll add to you. And that's all he asks. And if we but try, and when we fall, get up and go do it again, that things are fine. And he'll make up the difference. And, he's our physician, but he's also our advocate. And when he says that, we should forgive everyone, that's exactly right. We should forgive everyone. But he says he can forget. We as mortals can't forget sometimes. I believe we can forgive. But I believe he will forget as far as our judgment is concerned. That's gone. That's no longer put in evidence. And it's the most incredible thing. And I'm just so humbled by that how he uses an imperfect vessel like mine and can allow you to do things that you never could have done on your own. And is just genuinely there for you, no matter what, in your darkest hours. You know, I'm just so blessed that it is amazing. But that's the testimony I have of Jesus Christ.
Well, it's a powerful testimony, and it's amazing to see how that testimony started when you were so young and you didn't even realize what was happening. You didn't realize every time the Lord was preparing you, every time he protected you through that preparation and took you all the way through to where you are today. And you're still being strengthened by things that happened decades and decades ago. And just now realizing maybe even some of those things that happened and the Lord's hand in it and just how close he really is. So thank you so much for sharing your testimony.
Oh, you're so very welcome, and thank you for asking me to do this.
Absolutely. It's been a wonderful time with you tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.